as a kid myself, is a hell of a lot better now than what it was in the 80s when I grew up. And I'm not going to go through the list, but I think everybody in this room knows what I'm talking about. So, I mean, by all means, you know, challenge us to do better, but please don't rubbish an entire record which saw us introduce things like the national minimum wage, taking 500,000 children out of poverty.
Before you get into a list, are you going to rebrand the party?
Well, look, I mean, do we want, you know, is the aim to become the party of the good society? Absolutely. I'm quite happy for us to carry that tag. I've been talking about it from before when I was elected, since I was elected, and I will carry on doing so. But look, in terms of, perhaps if I just make a comment on this, on the actual subject matter.
Please do. Someone should.
On movement. On movement politics. And please do email me about your issue, and I'll follow up on it by all means. Look, I mean, I think one of the things that we need to do is, I think often as a Labour Party, we, if you like, became a machine which existed to win elections, okay? And it was very much about winning to ensure that you got myself, MPs, councillors elected, and the rest of it. I think what we lost touch with was this sense that actually people want more from a political party. They actually want a movement so that when things go wrong in their neighbourhood, they think of the Labour Party. And I mean, I already touched on it. One of the things that is completely occupying me in terms of constituency issues at the moment is the serious youth violence that you have in inner city constituencies like mine. And when one of my young constituents gets shot several times 2 weeks ago, I want us to be in a situation where, after obviously, A, there's a huge desire to get hold of the people who perpetrate these dreadful acts, and of course there is a shock and dreadful grief which the families that I meet all the time experience. They think, do you know what, I'm going to go to the Labour Party because they are a vehicle through which we can actually transform this community so things like this don't happen again. So as well as winning elections, we also need to be a machine that people come to because they want it to solve their problems and they see it as a solution to that. And that's what I'm working towards.
Before you go, that gentleman's question, does the movement involve withdrawing your Labour? Are you going to persuade him not to go on strike?
Well, I think we've got to, I mean, in relation, I would not deny anybody's right to strike, okay? But let me say this. What the government is seeking to do, and it is perhaps the most divisive government we've seen in several decades, is they want to set up one part of our community and our societies against another. They want to set up the public against the private. And what they want to say to the majority of people in this country, they're saying all these public sector workers, they admit to mention actually that when you break your leg and you go into hospital, they're the ones who are trolling you around. They admit to mention they're the very people who are teaching your kids. It doesn't matter. Their strategy is to set it up so it's an argument that's saying all these people with these generous rights, and benefits in the public sector are taking you guys for a ride while you're struggling and your rights, those of you who are working in the private sector, are being wound down. We must not go down the trap that they are setting for us, which means we have to form a negotiated solution. So look, I'm not going to deny anyone's right to strike. I don't think, frankly, people working in the public sector want to strike, never mind the people who have to use the services who are inconvenienced by it. But let's actually start using a language of partnership and collaboration which gets us to a solution that works for everybody, and that's got to be the aim.
Okay, Chuka, thank you very much for coming. I know you've got to go. Holly, you...
Unfair. But if you're talking about systematic long strikes where mothers have to leave their jobs and go and collect their children look after the children because the schools are shut, that's no way to win public opinion, and I don't think it'll work. So don't go into strikes where you're destined to lose and you hand it to the government on a plate because they become on the side of the users of public services against the providers of public services. Great risk. I really want to talk about what I think is the first fundamental thing about how the left, broad left, should be organising. First of all, is getting facts across. What strikes me, and in the work I've done, a lot of the research I've looked at, is that people are so unaware about the shape of the society they live in, absolutely clueless about, partly because of the decline of trade unions, about what other people earn and where they stand in the spectrum. They don't know how unfair this society is. They might know a bit about bankers, but they have been greatly misled. All of us in this together. They believe in social mobility when we know it's virtually non-existent, but they think anybody can make it. Everybody places themselves on the scale far closer to the middle than they really are. The rich think they're more ordinary than they are. The poor think they're more ordinary than they are. The first thing we need to do is to spell out to people quite how bad the unfairness is and what the trajectory is for the future, how it is going in this direction with everybody, the very social fabric being ripped apart. And until people have the basic numbers and figures at their fingertips, we've just got to keep putting them out there all the time in order to deny what the government says about all in this together.
Caroline.
I wanted to come back to something that Chuka said, which I agree with, which was about how we need to be really mindful of the way in which the government is trying to divide people at the moment. You know, it's no mistake that they are, or no accident that they are deliberately trying to divide between the public sector pension workers and private sector. But similarly, you know, in the whole of the Cuts programme, that same kind of theme has been there, and so they try to divide between frontline services and backroom staff, as if the frontline services didn't actually depend on there being some backroom staff to support them to do the job. But I think as well, in terms of building this movement, so we need to recognise that everybody's struggle is everybody else's struggle, and so come together, so don't be divided. But I think we also need to get better at articulating what our vision is of an economy that is both socially just and environmentally sustainable. I think we've got to paint a much more compelling picture of it. I think too often we're very clear about what we're against. We don't like cuts and we don't like environmental pollution, but we need to get much better at painting that compelling picture of what a greener, fairer society would look like. And I think we've got such a good news story to tell on that. NEF, for example, New Economics Foundation, have been doing some excellent work on what the economy would look like if we all worked a little bit less in order to share work around more. Now, of course, there are big questions then about what happens to salaries and so forth. But that links you in then to the whole discussion about what do we want out of life? What is life about, in a sense? Is it about acquiring more and more stuff to show off to people that we don't really care about? You know, I mean, do we really want to be on our deathbeds and look back and think, my God, I wish I'd spent more time in the office to buy more stuff? No, we don't. It's the quality of our relationships, it's the quality of our time with our families and so on that really matters. And if we could get some of the debate onto that, which is not an exit from the really knotty problems about what level of pensions people are going to get and standing up against, you know, getting rid of trebling tuition fees and so forth, but it is part of setting out what that good society is actually going to look like. And I won't persuade you not to go out to strike. I would wish you didn't have to do it, but I would also alert you to an early day motion that I have put down with John MacDonald just last week, precisely upholding the right to strike in these circumstances.
Okay, Ruth Lister.
I'll be very brief because I realise we're encroaching on other people's time. When Ed Miliband made his acceptance speech at Labour Party conference, I was really cheered by the fact he talked about the good society. And I think he needs to do more thinking about that, more talking about it, in a way which both gives some sense of what Labour stands for, where it's going, but which unites people's everyday experiences with broader ideals around equality, sustainability, democracy, social justice. And one way of doing that is very much the sort of through the concrete, and Compass is currently asking its members and supporters, what does a good society mean to you? What does the good life mean to you? What do you need to live a good life? And I think when you put those together, and I'm hoping that the kind of listening exercise the Labour Party is doing now might also be doing that through that, Ed Miliband and the party can give a more inspiring vision of what it stands for, and that's the most effective way, I think, of opposing this rather woolly notion of the big society, which is really just a screen for reducing the role of the state.
John Harris, would you rebrand Labour?
I've been trying for about 15 years to rebrand Labour, probably, I think. Those were on the questions like someone was going to say, what's your favourite Beatles album? And there'd be a pause and they'd go, because Beatles albums are a vital part of the good society, and kind of pass it off like that. But anyway, it's Revolver, incidentally. Anyway, this question of strikes, my misgivings about where the trade unions, or more specifically the trade union leadership, are going, don't have anything to do with the justice of the trade unions' cause and the awfulness of what this government's doing. But here's the thing. Dave Prentice, the leader of Unison, so he's presented with this scenario in which he's got to start, A, kicking up a stink, and B, he's got to harness the maximum public support for what the trade unions are doing. He has to point out the awful predicament his members are being put in. He's got to break through this idea of gold-plated pensions. He's got to point out the millions of people who work in the public sector are low paid, and somehow he's got to communicate that vision and that cause, not just to the likes of you and I, or people in Labour heartlands, but people in Harlow and Milton Keynes and the sort of places where sometimes our politics has a hard time. What does Dave Prentice do? He breaks cover, and his 2 chosen reference points, just to make sure it plays brilliantly in Harlow and Milton Keynes, are the general strike of 1926. And he also says it's going to be like the miners' strike, only we're going to win. Brilliant, Dave. I mean, that's magnificent. You've got a degree in public relations. This is terrible, right? And you want to watch this, because I tell you why. And this will sound a little bit hectoring and emotional, but it is, right? When I was in my teens, the left kept losing, right? And we went through the miners' strike, which is the most key historical event in my political lifetime, right? That's when the left lost. That's when the way was open to everything Mrs. Thatcher, aspects of New Labour, and certainly this coalition. The way was open to everything that they did. I don't want the left to lose again. But when I see them behaving in as clueless a way as that, the trade union leadership, that's what starts to worry me. And I think we should bear that in mind, okay?
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much for all of our panelists, including Chuka, who has gone. Thank you all for coming to this question time session. We're now going to hand over to people like Simon Hughes, who are going to tell us how great the coalition government is. But thank you all for coming.